Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Matt DeLockery. Today, we have with us Dale Stevens, and we're going to talk about what it means to be an American Christian versus a Christian American. So, Dale, welcome, and thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks, bud. Thank you, Matt. My name is Dale Stevens. He said, pastor to Pure Hope Church here in Atlanta, Georgia. Probably, I assume, Matt, because you're so bright and smart, and this is not intentional flattery, but I assume your
You've known me
audience.
longer than that, Dale. You've known me longer than that.
Yeah. So, but I assume that your audience, shares some of those same qualities, and so I think it would probably be appropriate for me to share a little bit about my background. So, I have a undergraduate degree in religion from Lee University, and some higher education in religion, pastoral ministry kind of stuff. And my most recent stuff is towards intercultural studies or missions, missiology. So I start that to say, I think the important thing to go away there is I think about American culture and what it means to be a pastor to that culture, what it means to be a Christian in that culture. And so because of that, I come with a little bit of a kind of a tornness of a kind of respect and the genius of being an American and sort of the brilliance of the freedoms and all that comes with that, but also as a critic, and I think that seems to be the biblical stance in the sense that Jesus and his followers were critics of the parts of the culture that did not align with the best, healthiest values, particularly in lines to God and his expectations of humanity. So I just wanted to kind of set the preface of kind of who I am, kind of give that background. That's the typical academic thing to do, right?
Yeah, it is. And, long, super long introductions.
Yeah, there you go.
Here's the method. And 100 pages later, okay, now chapter one.
So there's my delimitations for whoever cares. So I love this topic and this idea. I think it's a challenging one. Matt, you and I have talked privately about this and leading up to this conversation. And I shared, very authentically with you the complexities of this conversation for me and how it connects to my life personally, and sort of there's some natural traps involved in this conversation. There's some traps of us and them, and that is not just sort of outside the walls of our relationships, but within our family dynamics, right? There are some, my family, who are on one side of the coin, others on the other side of the coin. And so thinking about Christianity and politics, thinking about American culture is tricky. We set this up as American Christian versus Christian American. I think for some of us that feels kind of almost elementary. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like saying Jesus loves you. It's like, well, okay, I get that. All right, it's a simple statement. But that statement expounded upon, thought about, reflected on, probably could take a person a lifetime to uncover all that is unveiled in that, all that's a part of that statement. And I feel similarly about the phrase Christian American in contrast to American Christian. It seems like almost elementary at first, but the reality is that those two things are very thoughtful, and there's lots to think about inside of those two scopes. Matt, you came from an engineering school, right? And one of the things you learn, as I understand it, in engineering is that there are some fundamentals, and some fundamentals exist. Like, for example, priority matters. Now, I didn't go to an engineering school, but I know in making a cake, priority matters. You have to add certain ingredients at a certain time, right? It's, again, sounds elementary, but I bring that to say the concept of American Christian, where American modifies English lit or grammar, modifies the Christian, the modifier there, versus the Christian modifies the American is really important to me, and I think important to God. And so for me, if American modifies or describes, or maybe we could say so far as controls the direction of my choices, that's a very different thing than me thinking through the lens of Christian American, where the Christian on the front end pushes and shapes how I think about what it means to be a Christian.
Right. The thing is, I think most people would agree with that. And The thing is, there's people who agree with that who are on both sides of some really, really important issues. They're all saying, yeah, it's more important to be a Christian first than it is to be American. But we still end up with some wildly different perspectives on things. And I know you've thought a lot about this. Could you pick one of those, pick a topic, and like, instead of staying in the theoretical, let's look at an issue, and let's, where the rubber meets the road, and let's talk about, this or that thing and why people take different sides and how it works out to whether we're putting one or the other first.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe I will answer that. Let me do one bit of backdrop. Of course, as a theologian or someone who studies theology, I want the framework, a biblical framework, right? And just so happens I'm studying the book of Galatians right now. And, Paul, it's the only time Paul opens his letter without saying, I thank God for you, right? He goes right into the, he's hacked off, he's ticked, he's mad. And he's mad because they've distorted the gospel. So for those of you who may or may not be Christian, they've distorted truth. We can agree on those phrasing, right? And so Paul comes at them. And this, by the way, is in contrast to how he treats the Corinthians. And the Corinthians are interesting because they're doing a lot of the things that we would think that would be like totally antithetical to the religious right, for example. The Corinthians are spiritual abusers. They're having orgies, and they're having homosexuality. They're having all kinds of these practices that sometimes in modern America we think we come hard against. And yet Paul introduces them as like, I thank God for you, you're the saints in Corinth, and he goes on and on and on. And here in Galatia, he comes harder. Why? Because it's less, the behavior is important, the code is important, but it's the phrase, right? The why before the what. Like they've missed that, they've distorted the actual gospel message. And so I opened with that to say, to your question about American politics, particularly like a particular issue today, like the grind between why this, why that, I think a lot of it is distortions and conflation. So for me, one of the biggest distortions would be the conflation that to be religious, to be Christian or religious means you have to be Republican. We can have all kinds of dialogue about that, and maybe we will. But I think that's already for me an initial like red flag that I'm not coming with a purely Christian motivation or agenda or a pure discernment into what is truth. And I've already aligned myself with a particular tradition, or in this case, party. And now I start to interpret my Christianity in light of that. Maybe it's helpful to think, maybe I should also say that I am the kind of person who believes that Christians have an opportunity in this world, on this side of heaven, to be transformation change agents, to bring life and love and liberty and justice and all of these kinds of things. And so I'm trying to decide in my head while I stall which one's the right one to take on. What about, will you want to just pick one and then I'll just go with it?
Pick one as far as like what?
Heavy like topic? That, yeah.
Alrighty. Let's see here. Well, we talked about pro-life a little while ago when we were, talking about topics that you're interested in stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty divisive one. And it divides people on party lines, and it sounds to a lot of people on both sides of the issue, whether you're pro-life or you're pro-choice, a lot of people think that there's a very, very strong, correct answer. Yeah. And people are extremely divided. It breaks down political lines, and people on both sides. People call themselves Christians on both sides, whether they're left or right. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great one, man. That's probably one of the most divisive ones. Yes, it's one of the hardest ones, right? And so, to that, I mean, this is where the gospel ultimately should critique, in the best possible sense of the word, both parties, right? It should critique us whether we're pro-life or pro-choice. It should critique us what we mean by pro-life. So I say, when people challenge me on pro-life, I say this: I am 100% pro-life. I'm pro-life. I think that the Genesis 1 and 2 account about the Imago Dei, humanity being created in God's likeness, and all the various passages about what it means to be human in regards to our relationship with God, I think is keenly accurate, is biblical, is appropriate. I also think, though, that pro-life means more than just voting every 4 years. I'll share from my own personal life, not as a pat on the back, but just as maybe a model. Humbly, my wife and I, we adopted children. We adopted because we're pro-life, and so thinking about what is pro-life in regards to Christian politics from the Republican side, I would encourage and be like, yes, you're right. That is true. It's absolutely correct. The biblical example is a pro-life testament to that. But it means more than just voting once a year. That doesn't necessarily mean you're pro-life. And yet I would also say I'm pro-life. I flip to my Democratic friends, particularly mainline and more specifically the ones that sometimes get left out of the picture in regards to evangelical Christians, is our Black brothers and sisters who are believers, who tend to align on the Democratic side, but are not necessarily pro-abortion. They're pro-life too. They're pro-life in regards to equality, what it means, what it looks like for them and their family to live in a pro-life system. And so I think this is where I would critique that side and go, okay, so in the way that I critique the Republican side, say, hey, it's more than about a vote. And also don't let the conflation of a party determine your beliefs and your values. On the other side, I would say, hey, don't let the same conflation in a different way distort the clarity of the gospel that, yes, it is pro-life, and yet not just about the equality and the equity of your family and your lineage, but also in what does it look like to be pro-life and sort of challenge that more democratic leaning about life in those regards. Does that make sense? So I would want to, what I'm trying to describe is, I would want to critique and uplift the theological accuracy on both sides, and I would want to give a confrontational or honest judgment on where those sides devolve and don't see things clearly. In other words, they both have kind of a distorted imagery of the full picture of the gospel. Now, what do we do with that, right? Like, okay, great. So neither one's landed. It doesn't help you land. And then this is the part that is a struggle for me personally is, how do you vote? That's a lot more heavier framework than I'm probably prepared to answer today. I think it obviously has to do with a prayerful life and discerning and all those kinds of things. But I guess for the purposes of our conversation today, I just wanted to highlight, it's not that, I guess I'm saying is both sides have a part of the picture of the gospel, clarity of truth. I'm not sure that either political side has the full picture of truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I don't think that it's terribly difficult to think that politicians don't have religion right. I mean, I don't think there's hardly anybody in the country think that politicians have much of anything right. There's not a lot of people that we value less than politicians in America. I think that's a pretty universally agreed on thing that we don't like them. So that's not hard to imagine that they don't have religion right, ours in particular. But getting back to the platform itself, I think a lot of people say, yeah, I don't like these politicians and I vote for them. And both sides would probably say the same thing. I vote for these people, even if I don't like them very much. But it's mostly because I think they're going to defend the positions that I hold. And so I think what people would say is probably, speaking for them, was probably say, like, I hold these particular positions, and I think that this is what I think it means. And I see that one particular party maybe supports my positions more than others. But what you said was interesting. And I think this is how a lot of these sorts of issues go. On the pro-life thing, the people on the right seem to see it very much as anti-abortion. And that's their idea of pro-life. A lot of people on the left, I think, view it in a broader sense. It's less specific than just anti-abortion. Even if they're, whether they're pro-choice or not, they view pro-life as in the whole life of all of the people who are involved, which in their case, and the reason they're pro-choice, includes the mother. And so now we get into a debate about what does it mean to be pro-life? What does life refer to? Just does it refer to the not death of the child that the mother is carrying, or does it refer to the not technical death, but the not loss of quote unquote life of the mother and her ability to raise the child throughout its life. And I think those are the sorts of conversations that we need to have, because right now we're sort of just like arguing. It's like my sports team versus your sports team, and then we fight, and the other side is always wrong and the refs are always against us and we get nowhere. So right. So yeah, I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to have as people. So what does it mean to be pro-life, or in any other topic, that sort of thing?
That's I'm with you 100%, and that's sort of what I'm advocating for. But that takes it out of the political vote and it makes about the political life, right? So when I say political life, there's the public politic, the public use of power, and there's the private use of power. There's the institutional use of power, the church, for example. I don't know if the numbers are still hold true, but at one point, Bethany Christian Services, a prominent Christian foster care and adoption social services organization, they said at one point that if every church had one family in America, there would be no more orphans in America. Be no more kids.
If every church had one family who adopted?
Correct. Yeah, correct. And so the idea is to show that's like a solvable problem. Now, that problem then might reiterate itself, but it shows kind of how it could work. And when I think about sort of the Republican agenda and the Democratic agenda, I see both of them having their own forms of selfishness, and I'll put that in there. I do see that the Republican Party tends to have a little bit of a higher individualistic nature. Democratic tends to think a little bit more collective, and I think that's a little bit more white majority culture tends to be more individualistic, and the black culture tends to be a little bit more communal. Though I think both have moved into a pretty strong sense of individualism. And but to your point, I'm a fan, not a groupie as I say, but a fan of Stanley Hauerwas. He's got a pretty great Christian reader ethic, a book on ethic, and he makes this case at one point. He says that I've never met, no one's ever come to our church, a woman who just couldn't wait to have an abortion. Many felt they didn't have the choice to have an abortion. And so this is where I think I would encourage all of our Christian brothers and sisters, regardless of political party, that if you want to be pro-life in this regard, be pro-life in this regard. Adopt, foster, care for, help a mother along. Like, this is where our politics can go beyond a vote, and we can truly utilize our power and the grace given to us by God and actually make a societal difference.
So basically what you're doing is you're asking people to put their money where their mouth is. It's like, if you really believe in this thing, then stop just talking about it. Because frankly, it's really easy to vote, especially if you only do it the presidential elections. It's once every 4 years. You stand in line for a little bit, or you do an absentee ballot, and then you can feel good about yourself for the next seveul years.
Right.
But
you can actually,
like adopting children takes a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I do. And again, I try to hopefully I sound humble as I want to be humble. But that's absolutely right. I don't think that being pro-life is voting every 4 years. I think it can be a part of it. It can be, if that's how the Lord God guides you, sure. But I think it's more than that. I would even say it's easy to stroke a check. It's hard to live it out. But that is like, right, this is, as Christians, like, this is a theological conversation. That's the whole thing, right? Jesus says, I no longer call you friends, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. And no greater love than this, that one man give his life to another. And it's a powerful act to die for somebody. It's also really powerful to live with them and for them the remainder of your days. It's not to diminish the cross at all. Please misunderstand that. But there is a repeated sacrifice on a daily basis when you raise children, especially ones you've adopted.
Yeah, I can imagine. I don't have kids, so I'll take your word for it. It sounds reasonable.
You can do a thought experiment.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for me to imagine that it's not difficult to have kids. I mean, I suppose there's theoretically some super easy kids to raise out there. There's probably like 3 of them. But in general, yeah, I assume it's quite difficult. There's another question or another topic related to the religion and politics. Maybe it's just politics, but it seems, I don't know, all of it's so tied in together that it kind of is something to address. What about conspiracy theories? Because there's a lot of that going around.
Yeah.
Like just all over the place. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like with people accepting stuff that they just hear and
well,
all of that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, you brought up a good point already in regards to this. For me, the background of the conspiracy theory is an erosion in trust, and you described an erosion in trust of our political theory or of our political figures, and that's absolutely true. I just think there's a societal erosion of trust, right? Howard Putnam out of Harvard, he talks about social capital and describes it in different ways, and one of those is a trust element. And I think this erosion of trust and like matched with our individualism is kind of what got us in this era. As I referenced Howard Watts earlier, I think he quotes, if I remember correctly, Layman Senna, if you remember that, if you know that theologian. But he writes something about America wasn't just founded as a Christian nation, it was also founded as an experiment of the Enlightenment. And he warns, this is probably in the 90s, that the outworking of that will be extreme individualism. So you take extreme individualism where I'm just worried about myself and maybe at best my family unit, and you match that with an erosion of trust, and that erosion of trust not just in political figures but also in information sources, right? So Facebook and Twitter, they're all on the block. Google's on the block. We don't trust any of those guys. And then you have certain temperaments, it seems, in the world that are trying to patternize the world, make sense of it, which, by the way, we all do as humans. We all try to make sense and patternize the world. It's just part of our humanity. And that sets itself up for grabbing all kinds of random bits of information from random places and trying to make sense of it all. And there's something within humans. Remember when, maybe you can relate to this, Matt. Remember when we were in high school and you're like, when you discovered the band before everybody else, there's something about you're the insider. Or I knew that band before anybody, or I knew he would be good, or there's something about us as humans that we like to have the inside track, we like to have the scoop on everybody else. And I think all of these are kinds of working to the formula of a conspiracy theory. Maybe, I don't know what you'd call this, but this is like the age of the conspiracy theory. And then you match that with one other algorithm, I guess, factor in regards to our conversation. That's Christians, right? Christians have an apocalyptic leaning, right? We think about the end. We think about the next life. We think about what factors may lead to the end, even though Jesus warned that. We still try to do it. And it has seemed to really concoct this perfect recipe for conspiracy, like religious conspiracy theory might be the best phrase. I don't even know how to describe it.
I mean, yeah, that works for me.
I have a friend, maybe a watch later. His name's Earl Krebs. He has a PhD from, I think, Northwestern. If I got that wrong, forgive me, Earl. But he did his PhD in communication theory. And his concentration was conspiracy theories. And I think this was like the 1970s, by the way, which, conspiracy theories in the 70s probably would have looked like John F. Kennedy, Elvis, and like an alien, encounter. And look where we have, I use this word intentionally, devolved to. That conspiracy theories aren't like these like 3, randomized things. JFK, Elvis's death and UFOs. But it's gotten really rooted in our actual life. Like, think about that. Like, it's no longer something out there to them over there, but now we think that it's not just happening to them there, it's happening to us here. At the level of misinformation, fake news, the level of X, Y, and Z, and then of course, if you throw the theology angle into it, then it's about vaccines. And is this the mark of the beast in X, Y, and Z? It says it's a very convoluted time. I haven't given you a great answer. I've told you things how I'm thinking about it, how it's coming to be clear to me.
No, but that's interesting about the being out there versus in here, because that will ramp people up a whole lot more. Because if it's just out there, it's like, okay, well, Elvis being alive or dead doesn't really affect my life unless he's actually living in my basement. I have to feed him every now and then. But other than that, like, it doesn't really do anything to me. But if we think these conspiracy theories are actually changing our lives, that's going to wind people up a lot. And so now it's not just some sort of a passing thing that you can care about or not or whatever. It's like you're gonna act if you think it's real.
Well, let's add in another dynamic. So getting to your point, less abstract. Another angle is fear. Fear is a powerful tool of communication. It moves people to behavior. If you don't, and we can think about this, you say, okay, first in the Christian world, think about the 1980s and how many people came forward because they didn't want to go to hell. I mean, it was like, brother, if you go home in your Corvette today and you get hit by a car, where are you going to be? You know what I mean? It was a knock on the door. If you die today, if you drop dead of a heart attack, man, where are you going to be? Like, that motivated people. It didn't, by the way, motivate to long-standing change. But but now that was, generally, I was speaking, that was an individual in an isolated moment in a sanctuary of a church on Easter Sunday or something. But now that's all day long. If you're a Republican, guess what? There's fear-mongering on that side. If you're a Democrat, there's fear-mongering on that side. And guess what? That we are a two-party system, so almost everybody falls in that. And then you could probably make the case for Tea Party or third parties. They'll probably have their own form of it. All that to say, you add religion, you add power, you add politics, you add this individual component and possibility with fear, and it's all day long. That's a heavy thing.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's just. I mean, and it's not like it's just sort of there. I mean, the media winds everybody up on purpose, because if you have people afraid, then they're going to pay attention. If they're going to pay attention, then they're going to be able to sell more ads, and so they're literally like. I mean, that's just business. Like, if you're trying to make, support your station, you make money, then you can do what gets people engaged. And so somewhere along the line, it's like, I mean, we have to, I think, take responsibility for our own selves and like just not give in to being afraid of everything and think through what's worth really focusing on and not, because the inputs from the outside are not going to get any less. I mean, they're not going to just go away, because we have news on the TV, we have news and stuff on our phone, and even if we ignore all that stuff, we have friends who pay attention to it, and so then, I mean, it's just going to be there. So at some point, there has to be some sort of a filter on what's real and what's not real, what's important, not important, and no one's going to do that for us. So we got to do it, right? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But let me backtrack to hair. You hinted at the connection of capitalism, right? Again, please misunderstand. Like, I love the USA. I'm glad I was born here. Like, there's so much to be thankful for here. And yet, so this is like, don't talk bad about my mom, but I can, you know what I mean? Like so when I say these things, it's not because I'm a hater on America, but the reality is we are capitalistic. And there's lots of good in that, in the sense that there's a healthy, robust middle class. I've been all over the world and I've seen non-healthy, robust middle class. And so I'm grateful for that. But that has also, the negative of that is what you said, the profiteer, right? And so there's a capitalistic angle. And so this is a great example to circle back to our American Christian versus Christian American, because American Christian thinks that you define what is good. And if good equals healthy and financially solvent, and good equals, access to riches or access to opportunities, all these kinds of things that can start to then justify why you do what you do as a Christian. Now, your Americanism is justifying your Christianity. Another one that's maybe a little easier and harder to think about is death. I'm not looking forward to dying, but we do everything in our power to avoid death. But the Christian message is one that death is a part of this thing called life. And so that every decision should not be weighed through the possibility of, I might die. Does that make sense? And so I'm just trying to use a couple of examples to say retooling our priorities and redefining what is good, what is health, And so, but that's not the world around us. The world around us is profiting off of fear mongering. The world around us is profiting off of news and salaciousness. The world around us is profiting off of us electing them into power. And so, yet another part of this ingredient of the tricky world we live in.
Well, that's. I mean, it's requiring us to do a little bit more than what most people have had to do for most of history, instead of just focusing on what it's going to take for us to survive and, take care of ourselves and our family. It's forcing us to have to think about something a little bit broader than that, about more than just me and mine, and think about the people in the world around us, which goes really against our American individualism, which, I mean, that's sort of our country. We're all about us. And that works very well for some things. But when you get too much of it, it can cause a problem, because you do have to think about the world around you.
Yeah, I'm rather convinced that some of our issues in America is that we don't have a tangible enemy. And so, just for a moment, let's think about like the 1700s, kind of a rose-colored lens for a moment. But let's say, you and I, we're brothers, we're a good Christian family, we're doing all the right things, ignore all the other potential bad things going on. But you and I decide we're going to go to, I don't know, Kentucky. We're going to hitch up our wagons tonight. We're going to go ride. Well, we probably don't have the same kind of bickering when we hear the coyotes around us. We hear the bear marks at night. You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna kind of rally a little bit differently. We're probably not gonna bicker over like who gets the last bite of beans. You know what I mean? Like, and so,
Right.
Something about the safety and something about our privilege and our richness and our wealth allows us to bicker and fight over all kinds of things. That some of these things are super important. Life is super important. Other things sometimes are. I just think they would be non-existent if we had a more aligned target. And I don't mean other humans, by the way. That's a problem. We've made them the only target.
Another American problem.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, we target a lot of people in a lot of places because we have a lot of toys that we feel like we need to use.
Yeah. By the way, pro-life, right? Pro-life is foreign policy. Pro-life is the immigrant. Why? Because Jesus was the immigrant. Pro-life is the refugee. This is why we're talking about pro-life, and this is how it gets back into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. It seems like that. What were you saying just a minute ago about the? Oh yes, maybe the wealth and the security of so many people is what's causing part of the problems, because we don't have anything to do. Like, we don't know where to go forward. It's like if we're worried about coyotes and bears and whatever else, then we have nothing to do but focus on survival. And so we have to work together and we have to do things. But if it's like, but if most of our needs are taken care of, or all of our needs and most of our wants, like most people, then it's, all right, what do we do now? Mm-hmm. And if we don't have a direction forward, then we're just going to put our energy into something else, and it may not necessarily be the most productive thing.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if it's a facade, right? Maybe the reality is there is some real problem out there that we miss or are delaying. Not a good example, but the one that comes to mind would be like, say, our debt, right? Like the national debt at whatever trillions of dollars it is. And again, I know that could lean you one political side or the other, and I don't necessarily mean for that to take place here. But I'm just using that as probably not the great example, but there are real examples. Well, maybe it's war on poverty, or maybe it's I don't know. There's some. We have some. I'm going blank now. We have some real systemic issues with some real challenges, and within our walls and outside of our political walls, and yet somehow we've chosen to choose the ones that are more inward, almost more shallow.
Yeah, I mean, it should be like, I mean, I'm not a politician, and I don't spend much time thinking about politics, but it seems to me that there should be a lot of agreement on a lot of issues, like something like the national debt. Like, I can't imagine that it's good to have loads and loads and loads of debt for that to keep going up and up. What we do about it should be what we argue about. Like, but I have a hard time thinking that we disagree on whether having trillions of dollars in debt is a good thing or not. Like it seems like that should be an agreement. Like that's bad.
Yeah.
And it's just, what do we do about it? That's the question. And it seems like there's so many issues like that, like that I want to say should be a problem, like homelessness or people going hungry or something like that should be, we should agree that that's bad and we would need to do something about it. And the only question is how, but it doesn't seem like that's a thing people necessarily agree about.
Yeah, no, maybe again, no stones thrown, but it's a lot easier to Monday quarterback it at the water cooler, so to speak, or to listen to your favorite talk show host and yell at the radio than it is to actually get down on the grind and do that real work. And to be honest with you, as someone who partakes in some of that work, another thing that we're not comfortable with is there's no guarantee return on the investment. A lot of times you're talking
we want
about
a sure thing before we're willing to risk anything or spend our time. But like we want to know that it's going to work out. I will not take a step until someone shows me that this will work.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you see this in nonprofits, right? That one of the key phrases is evidence-based approaches. But that's like I don't know. It's like serving in tennis. You're playing percentages. but it's, again, not as American Christian. We want to send the money to the right place, the right nonprofits, the right organizations who are going to fix it the right way, or countries. You pick your political poison there. But as a Christian American, you go, I'm going to live selflessly and give away, not without any responsibility, but understanding that it's a call to give. It's not a call for a return.
And there's another problem with that. It's a lot like that whole person coming right out of college or out of high school, whatever, trying to get a job. It's like everybody wants experience, but how are you supposed to get experience unless you first have a job without any experience? So like nobody wants to give you that. So it's like it's a catch-22.
That's right.
And it's like nearly impossible to start. And it feels like it's almost the same sort of thing, like with people who are trying to do things, whether it's a ministry that's connected to religion or not, like people want to see that it works. It's like, well, it's not going to work if somebody doesn't like help to get it going like that. I mean, it seems like everything is because we want to be sure that it works, but sometimes you have to take a chance on something because it needs to be done.
Yeah, right. And I mean, I think this is similar to our political conversation in regards like how do you vote? And it's just not that simple. It's about conviction and it's about choice being implemented, right? I think what we want to do is to do that prayer where there's like 2 job opportunities and you're like, God, which one do I do? And you're like, well, I don't really know. So close the door. You know what I mean? It's like, but there's this thing, like there's this example. Where was it? Oh yeah, Genesis, right? Where Adam and Eve had to make a choice. Like part of being made in God's image is the fact that we have the power to make choice, power to choose our direction, our destiny, and which leads us to a really difficult thing, which is discernment. I don't think there's a 7 steps to choosing the right political candidate. I think there's some things we can take into consideration, prayer, those kind of things, scripture. But this is the muddy waters of real life, which is also political life. Is that, well, which nonprofit? Do you give the guy on the corner $1? What if he buys beer with it? I mean, you give it to him. And sometimes you don't. If God tells you to give it to him, you definitely give it to him. And so, but this is a little bit of the muddy water, so to speak.
Yeah, it is. Of course, if more people actually like thought through this sort of stuff and we had deeper thoughts about things, we might get better options for our political candidates. Like instead of if we're less willing to listen to rhetoric and we want more answers, if that's how we think and that's how we're driven, and that's what drives our normal conversations, then the people who just repeat single words, like I remember like the Obama-McCain election.
Yeah,
I hated it because Obama repeated hope and change, McCain repeated war hero. They each had 2 words, and they just repeated those a million times. And it's like I want to hear about stuff. I don't want, get into issues.
Yeah, it's politics has become very message driven. Like, what's your message? Send the message, and it's driven by some political scientists in the background with a focus group, I guess, right? And uh-oh, did I lose you? If you're still watching, I don't know if I'm still on or not. Hey, there you are.
There we go. I don't know. This happened last week. I thought it was just a one-time thing. My camera's being funny, so I'm going to start trying to figure this out. I don't know what's up.
It's all good. Did you catch what I was saying?
Now. Yeah, I heard everything that you were saying. It just cut out. So if it does that again, I can hear and see you. So you just keep going, and I'll fix it, and hopefully I can sort it out before next week.
So the focus, this is like the evidence-based approach, right? There's a focus group that says if you say these words, then that's what resonates most with them. And there's probably some level of accuracy that, right. That's where science comes into play, and it actually does work. But to your point, it's kind of a dumbing down of America. I tell you what, for all you listeners out there, go read the Constitution. Go read the articles, the bylaws of the Constitution and the amendments, and read some of the Federalist Papers. I mean, the level at which they write, I feel like an idiot with multiple degrees. I'm like, these guys, they write so eloquently and so beautifully, so thoughtfully, and it's like, how do we devolve from that to I don't know, influencer? It's like, I don't know where we've gone. But to your point, maybe it's hard for me to say. I'm gonna speculate. This is total conjecture. I don't know if the general audience is just dumber and it's about votes, or if maybe the ones who are electing aren't as bright as they once were.
I don't know. I mean, I have a hard time imagining that the people who get there are the politicians themselves are actually dumb. And there's probably some of them, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of comments about the ones who are, but I would question their morality before I would question their actual intelligence. Like, I think they probably most of them do well on IQ tests. In other areas of life, maybe not so much. But well, I mean, I think that is relevant to, who we elect, but it's like, they're going to do whatever, ultimately they're going to do whatever it takes to get themselves elected. And they run millions of, focus groups and surveys and tests to find out what will get people to pay attention. So at some point it's on us, and we're part of the problem. But I think even if it is mostly them, at the end of the day, all we can control is us. So
I guess the clarifier I would make would be, I don't necessarily mean they're not bright as a whole. I wonder how thoughtful, or to use an off-quoted phrase, how much they are in the echo chamber. And so you can have lots of thoughts, and you can think about lots of something, but in a singular way, right? I mean, I can think about 2 + 2 all day long. I mean, it doesn't necessarily expand my ability to think on 2 + 2. And so, when I read, because I literally read the Constitution in prep for this last week, and read some of the Federalist Papers, and the things which they were talking about and thinking through about liberty and about mutual responsibility, humanity, and all that comes with it, and trying to project a construct for the future. I just feel like they were light years ahead of us in many regards.
Well, I mean, their situation probably had a little bit to do with it. I mean, especially like, at the beginning, okay, we're thinking about founding a country. That's rather a big deal. And the guys who are signing the Declaration of Independence, it's like, if I put my name on this thing, then I can die. Yeah. So I want to make sure that I agree with the stuff that we're doing. So, I mean, there's that.
There is that.
That'll motivate you slightly. But I mean, you can't just do that out of nowhere. I mean, they had to have been preparing for this for their lives. And what do? We just, whoever promises us the stuff that we want, says the things that we hear, is like, okay. And also I think the more we become single issue voters, the more, frankly, disenfranchised we become. Because if the more people who are single issue voters, they know they can poll these people, find out how many of which, if I say this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, then I'll have the votes that I need, and then I can ignore your thoughts on everything else.
Yeah.
And the more complex voters we become, the more they're going to have to actually deal with issues, and less about picking the counties and how many people. And so they say things based off of, their focus groups.
Yeah, I was thinking through this morning about the temptation of Jesus, and right, the third temptation, his tempter quotes scripture to him, and I was thinking about the use of the manipulative use of scripture. Right, we hear that, and everyone goes, "Yeah, people abuse the Bible," but usually they have like a pastor in mind, or a preacher in mind, or some Christian orator or spiritual guru. But I don't think it's just them, right? Like, it is them. There's some of them that are abusing that and manipulating that. But there is a conflation of the gospel happening on all political spectrums, where there's a manipulation of using key phrases. I'm fairly convinced to get a vote rather than to actually align. It's almost like shopping for a cell phone plan. It's like trying to find like the one ingredient that will push you over the edge, like, you travel a lot? Well, you should get, Verizon, because they're everywhere. You want 5G? Well, we have the most 5G network. It's like they just find the one thing that will align you with, and hope you ignore all the other fine print.
Right. And that's what we're doing politically again. And that's not helpful. And that's just, all of those things. Are there?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I call that, I think about that in the phrase of Christian hijacking, right? That certain people, not everybody, I don't mean to make everybody, I don't personally think that every politician is evil or manipulative. There's probably some guys and gals up there in DC or here locally that are really genuinely good people who just want to see change. Unfortunately, I think a lot of them find themselves in a 200-plus-year-old tradition that's got a lot of uncoded rules, right? Rules and codes and symbols that aren't written. That you get there and you have, to your point, I'll use this as an example. I remember when Obama ran, and President, I'm going to be more polite than that. President Obama ran for office, and it was like, we're taking the troops out of Afghan. We're taking them out. Like, no, we're not going to leave anybody there. We're pulling out. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, I wonder what that first Department of Defense briefing is going to sound like. And they go, okay, I know that's what you want to do. Like, let's just say he had pure motivations. I don't know. So maybe, I hope he did. And they're like, I know you said that, but here's what you should also know. Like there are certain levels of information up there. And that one's an example of a written example that's classified, that I think that he probably was like, oh, well, we're going to do a different path than I had initially composed. That's, again, being gracious and giving him the benefit of the doubt. But that's speaking to that direction. But think about in our own natural lives, as Americans, how many unwritten rules there are, right? Like Colin Kaepernick, he hit on a rule, right? It was an unwritten rule. It's nowhere in our Constitution. It's nowhere in the law that you have to put your hand on your heart and you can't kneel. You know what I mean? But he hit one, and that's another example. But I think not only in our daily lives, but more particularly to our particular point today, I think there's a lot of politicians that get to those particular points of office, and they realize there's a lot of unwritten rules that some of them maybe are overwhelmed by and do their best. They probably don't last long, and some conform.
Yeah, I could see that. That seems to be the sort of choice that most people face in their lives on a less national scale. But it's still the, like, okay, you had all these ideas that are great, but then the problem is, it's like, well, doing something about those is not as easy as you thought it might be, and not everybody's going to be on your side, as well as it might actually be more complicated of a situation than you think it was, or you thought it was, and so there's nuance to things. And if And if we're people who can't see nuance and everything has to be black and white, then we're going to make some really, really simplistic decisions, which, it's really easy to say, well, I'm X. But what if that's not, the world's not clean and neat. And so you can't always just say I'm X or I'm not X. Sometimes you have to be a little bit, because there's other things that go along with stuff.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to make room for us in this conversation, is to find where you stake the boundaries, you find the muddy, and then you make a discernible best decision as at your current maturation in your faith. Right? I don't. Right. I'm responsible to what the Lord has exposed me to at this point in my faith. And so I again, I hope everyone hears it. I think kindly on those who think differently than me. And some of them, I think, well, I thought that way, and then I matured a little bit. And that's a little bit, can sound a little bit arrogant. I don't mean for it to be. And there's some that I don't understand that, but maybe I will one day.
Yeah, all any of us can do is just the best that we can with what we have. And I think what I want, is for people to actually try to do the best they can with what they have, or with what they know, with what they can do. Because then if you're trying to, then we can have a conversation about it. If you're not trying, then, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, I want that. Excuse me. And I also want to expose people to recognize, Americans particularly, recognize that there's a place to love and behold this country and recognize its shortcomings, not to be anti-American, but to make this truly a better place. And not by political domination, but in transformation of hearts and lives. Local, they always say local politics is the most important and none of us actually vote on. It's kind of the same thing. I'm kind of suggesting is at the local, the national level, that to take in some information and to be okay with confronting what is traditional ideals. And that's Jesus, right? And that's being an imitator of Christ. Christ shows up on the scene and he confronts every political landscape. He could, in fact, if he was kindness to any of them, it'd be kindness to Rome. He's give Caesar, and he tells Paul to tell us to submit to authority. These kinds of things. But when it comes to the religious political system, and I think we think of that as denominations, and it could be that, but for a lot of those people in those local communities, that was their local politician, was the law, was the religious law. And yet he has not just harsh words for harsh words' sake. He's not just some radical rebellious guy. He's trying to present truth and clarity. So I want people to give their best. Yes, and amen to that. I also want people to take the time to explore the frailties and the beauties of American political structures, and not just assume that one side's good, just for good sake. My grandfather, I'll say this. My grandfather had I think a third grade education, obviously a white male, was a sharecropper, and he read the Bible every single day of his life. He read the Bible more times than I have from beginning to end at 42. He didn't even get saved until his 30s. He just was a man of the word. And you know what? He was a Democrat. That just, for some, that's what? And
for a lot of people in the South, that's hard to imagine. Right.
And so political systems have shifted over centuries. I posted over not centuries, but decades. I posted an article one time on I want to say 40s or 50s, where it was a Democratic piece on being anti-abortion, and it was shocked me that was a thing. I just couldn't believe it. But it's a reminder that as entrenched as these systems are, they do move and shift. And so let's stay loyal to our loyalty to the fullest should be to the gospel, and holding a kind of flexibility with political party.
So what does that look like? We're kind of coming full circle here. What does that look like in daily life. And what is it? I mean, it sounds good to say let's be loyal to the gospel first and political party second. To the average person, what does it look like to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to give like an, X plus Y plus Z equals like you did it, loyalty. And it's something that
I mean, not like tell them how to vote, but like, how do you go about thinking through this? Like, how do you go about deciding?
Yeah.
Maybe let's leave the question of voting off the table and thinking like this or that political party, because that gets a little bit hairy, especially when there's only two options and stuff. Maybe we'll stop a little bit before that and just focus on issues.
Yeah.
Like, how do you decide what to think about a given issue? And maybe you have and allow your own personal platform, what you believe about stuff to shift a little bit more as new things are presented to you. And then you can worry about the voting thing at, some other point. But what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, biblical literacy, like a start there. And so I think there's kind of a trend, an upward trend in extra biblical books, authors writing about, like there's one, something to the effect of, misreading the Bible through Western eyes or something of that nature. I just read a book called Reading While Black. This is a black author who, Esau McCauley, did an excellent job on biblical hermeneutic through the lens of a black man. And there's I read Stanley Hauerwas. These are people that I don't always necessarily agree with politically, but they bring out other frames of reference to think through my biblical hermeneutic, how I read scripture. So it's easy to slide into. You can read the Bible every day. My grandfather probably read the Bible every day. I know he read it every day, but he probably on some days read things and he probably interpreted in the information set he had. And there's an importance to, one, read the Bible and asking the Lord to highlight that and discern that. There's also, you have to expose yourself to what God is saying to others. This is one of the beauties of being an intercultural studies guy, missiology, is not just reading all the old white guys like the Germans and the Reformed guys or whoever else you list them, but you start reading people of other colors or other nationalities. I've always been a big fan of the NIV. Why? Because it's the New International Version. You have 50-something scholars from 50 different countries. There's something about that perspective that broadens and helps shape. I don't know if it's accurate, but I tend to think a more, I don't want to say global. That's too politically charged, but a diversity in perspective challenges you to at least pray through and think through your biblical hermeneutic, your biblical beliefs, your orthodoxy, so to speak.
Because it makes you have to step outside of all I tend to see this thing this way, and the only reason it's not been challenged is because everybody around me tends to see it that way as well. And there's a lot of things like that it's, even though we disagree left and right frequently, there's still things that, like, because we're Americans, for example, like we tend to be individualists.
Right.
Well, most of the world isn't.
Yeah.
Like America, Western Europe, like tend to be more individualistic, but group-oriented cultures, there's more of them, like all of Asia, like Africa, like Latin America. It's like there's way more of them. And that's actually more like the biblical culture. So they probably read the Bible closer than we do. And so we need to step outside of what we're used to. Yeah, absolutely. And thankfully, those guys, those parts of the world, the global South, for example, is really rising in theology. Unfortunately, it's not always easy to get their materials as Americans, right? It's not always accessible, or it's not always easy to know, like, well, who should I read and where to find it, and I hope that changes, but that's why I kind of reference Esau's book. Another one would be, there's a book called Reading the Bible with the Damned. And I don't remember the guy's background or credentials, but he ends up reading the Bible with prisoners, and he starts thinking through prisoner as a person who's confined, oppressed, and starts thinking, man, you know what? The Bible had a lot of oppressed people. Now, not always on their own behalf, right? The Israelites were made captive
course, at certain times God would say it was because of their sin. He allowed that to happen. But the point is, you start reading the Bible through the lens of the damned, those who are condemned, and it just takes a different meaning than me and my middle class suburban house. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a biblical, a God-given perspective to offer as well. I'm not trying to say it's only one or the other. I am saying that I'd like to encourage your listeners and others to be exposed to these kinds of writers. Howard Ross is one for me. I'll tell you, a key moment for me with him was I've had a concealed carry permit. I have guns, right to bear arms, Second Amendment. I have them. I own guns. And I've been a pro-gun guy. Not, I don't have an NRA sticker or anything, but I'm pro-gun by and large. Well, Howard Ross is a pacifist, and he's like, he writes this really, pithy kind of a thing. Is like, Christians are the worst soldiers, and you're like, what? He goes, what kind of a soldier is supposed to love their enemy? What kind of a soldier is supposed to pray for their enemy? And he makes this clause, and that was something I had to sit there and think about, because in my little bubble, the adversary, the enemy, was the guy who made fun of me for being a Christian or for being a pastor. It didn't relate to me, and my context was too narrow to think about it actually being my enemy. And so that was kind of another one that Howard Ross did for me.
I'm going to ask you in just a little bit to give us some references, some things, and places that people can go and look for, more information and so forth. But before I do that, I want to get a couple of questions. So there's one already. I'll put it up on the screen in just a second and then read it. But if anybody else has any questions that you have and want to, get Dale to respond to them, comment, questions. If you have any cries of outrage, those are fine too.
I hope not.
Then, hopefully not. But put those in the chat, and hopefully we'll have something intelligent to say about them. So the first one is, what differences do you find between Christian American and Christian European, Christian Asian, Christian African? So if you're Christian in all of these different parts of the world, how does that, what does that look like? You spent some time traveling. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, that's a lot of what I think about in regards to doctoral studies. Yeah, there's tons. It's just I'll give a few, but I mean, the breadth of it is so deep and so wide. Let's think about a few. Time orientation, like how we think about time, how Far East or how the Southern world thinks about time, totally different. Sometimes we'll say things, you maybe have been to Latin America and you'll be like, oh, I'm on Colombian time, because time orientation is different. Not just like showing up 15 minutes late for the party or an hour late in some cultures, but just even how you think about the position of time. As Americans, we tend to be very time oriented, and we tend to be very future oriented. We don't think much about the past. We think only of the past in small bites, and it's more like, well, I learned, I'm not going to do that again. We go forward. We think forward, future. Germans, right? This is a little bit of our Germanicness coming through in the white majority culture. We tend to be timely, right? Like you're punctual. We're not as punctual as the Germans are, but we tend to be more punctual. Well, in some parts of the world, you're not punctual, but not only in time orientation. It's said, let's go to the context of Africa, which is a continent. Africa is a continent. It's like 40 plus odds countries, maybe more. I might get that wrong. But the point is, I'm going to make a generalization. And so understand the generalization. It's said that Africans tend to walk into the future backwards. So Africans, so if you think about Americans, we're head first to the future. We got our eye on the prize. Whereas Africans have the back of their head into the future, looking at the past, because the belief is that time is cyclical, and so what has happened in the past will happen again in the future. And so the best way to move forward in the future is by watching the past. I mean, that's just one on time. Think about space. Space, not as in outside space, but like in our temporal space. I'm in my office right now. I've got a big desk right here. You can kind of see I'm seated at another desk. This desk that I'm seated at is pressed against the wall. This one's pretty close to the wall, set back, and this is what's comfortable to me. In many parts of the world, your office, your space, your desk might be in the center of the room. You can think about, for those, I know Matt, you like the martial arts, but remember, my bed in my bedroom, the headboard is against the wall, but we all have seen the Kung Fu movie, right? And the bed is centered to the room. Like, that's just thinking about how space informs and shapes our culture. And so we reference, another one quickly would be individualism versus collectivism. This, by the way, is something that we can learn a little bit from our friends of color here in the States. They tend to be a little bit less individualistic versus us. And so individualism is about personal choice and how it affects me. Collectivistic thinking tends to be oriented around the community. How is this good for community? And so you think about, I'll give you an example. It's a famous missiology example, missionary example. There was a missionary that went to Japan. He went to the Shinto religious groupings, and he tells the Jesus story. And it gets to the part where he says, and Judas betrays Jesus. And they all start clapping, and they're like chanting for Judas. And the missionary's like, wait, what? Like, no. Like, this is a story about Jesus. But see, in a collectivistic culture, Jesus as the rebel against society was the outcast. He was the one bucking the system. That was an individual trying to shift a culture. Judas was trying to bring out the rebel and bring him into the community. That was a confrontation. That was a loving decision. So missionaries had to think. I think this happened in the maybe somewhere between the 20s, 30s, 50s, somewhere in that range. And they had to think through, okay, wow, we've got to think through the gospel message in a different way than we've thought about it. The gospel hasn't changed. It's still Jesus. But the orientation of the message has to be audience-centered. And the last example I'll give you is Just Left Me. If you there's all kinds of books out there on that kind of stuff. If you want a non-Christian thinking about sort of the contrast, I think contrasts are helpful. There's some famous guys named Gertz, Gertz, and Hofstede, Hofstede. You can Google that. And but they have a website that allows you to choose like America and like Nigeria, for example. And you can see they'll define them for you. You have 6 different kind of targets, risk aversion, different kind of things. And it'll show you on a scale of where we align with other cultures. And so when you get all that in your head, just remember you're talking about a Middle Eastern orientation. So if you kind of want to know a little bit more about the historic Middle East, you could probably look at those countries and think about them in light of the United States. That'll help you think about it a little bit.
That would be really helpful. After we're done here, we'll finish up in just a second. Could you send me a link to that? And and as I'm about to ask you other books, or you don't have to do it now. You can do it in a minute, and I'll put it in the description of this video. So if you're coming and watching this, in a little bit, then you can go down to the description. You can find what it's referencing. So that website, way to check, how do we compare to other places around the world, to sort of get an idea of our mindset, and definitely check out the Middle Eastern one for give you a closer idea of what biblical authors would have thought. But do you have anything else that'll help us learn how to see things from other perspectives, and which is sort of a starting point for moving into having a deeper view of issues, and how we can, if we understand our Christianity better, then we can understand how that affects or should affect the world around us. So can you give maybe a couple of references or places to look?
Yeah. You warned me of this, Matt, and I failed. I forgot. So please forgive me. So I'm going to go off the cuff. These may not be the best ones. I'm lucky because there just happens to be one sitting right here. This is a book called The Upside Down Kingdom by Donald Crable. This book was written in the 70s. And Don Crable is actually an Anabaptist, which, if you're familiar with their history, they're already a little bit critical of American politics. And but that he does a really good job. I think he's got a social scientist background. He does a really good job of thinking through what the political landscape, the economic landscape, the societal landscape of Jesus' time, and talks about what the kingdom is, which is ultimately just Jesus' teachings and Jesus' his personhood in the life of us. And so he does a really good job of kind of demonstrating how Jesus was different and why in the society and culture by which he lived. And of course, that makes some structural things for us to think about in our own context. That's a really good one. Another book, if you're interested in more of those cross-cultural shifts or thought processes and missions, there's a book called Perspectives, and I can send you that link to that book. It's like a 900-page volume, and essentially it's just a series of articles. And so some of them are built around like the question we had previously. Some of them are built around questions like cross-cultural communication, right? Like the sending and the message and how the message should be sent, and some of those cross-cultural components. Those are all really good. I'm trying to think. Hang tight with me 1 second.
You don't have to do it off. I mean, you don't have to do it this second. Like, you can just send it to me in a minute and just say, it'll be in the description. Dale, take a minute and think through it. A minute.
We'll do it.
I mean, a minute, it can be like, you can get me back to me in a few days. It's fine.
Okay.
It's not critical that it has to be right now.
Well, I'll have it to you by 12 o'clock tomorrow.
That's fine. Because, I mean, like, I know when somebody asks me for that, I say, hold on a minute. And then I have to go, and then I go through all my bookshelves, and I'm like, book by book, which is this helpful? Is this not helpful?
Yeah.
And which is why I like having books instead of digital things. It just makes it easier for me to look and to go back and find references and things. And so that's why I prefer dead trees.
Yeah. I tell you, in regards to commentary, InterVarsity Press has got a New Testament commentary with Craig Keener. And Craig Keener, Keener, he does a pretty good job of. Oh, you got it right there. Yeah,
I have it literally right here because I love this book.
Yeah, so Keener,
that's a great one.
We're fans of Keener because he's a Pentecostal scholar, and so am I. Well, I don't know if I'm a scholar, but I'm Pentecostal in background. So he does a really great job of that. N.T. Wright does a pretty good job of that, and some of his works as well. Obviously he studies a lot of the culture of the ancient Near East. So. Yeah,
that was one of the things that actually drew me to him first, was his looking at things from an ancient cultural perspective. And I hadn't gotten into any of his stuff on Paul. Like, I first discovered that in New Testament, the people of God, and looking at things from the ancient culture perspective. But that's a whole other conversation. So send me the links for those and all the things that you want people to take a look at, and I'll put them in the description. So. Any closing thoughts? Any final words of wisdom or direction that you can give anybody, or you just say, no, you got it?
Well, I feel like I was very muddy, so I apologize to everybody who thought that I was muddy. But I would say, I'll just tell you what I feel like God's saying to me, and that's to live less distracted. And I do aim to first and foremost want to live just like Jesus, right? Upside down. In our society where it deserves to be so, and right side up where that is fitting as well. And I do aim to be more thoughtful like our founding fathers. And I am sensing that part of the reason that I don't think the way they did is I don't spend 5 hours on horseback to the neighboring town just thinking things through. I'm in my leather seats, and I've got something playing in the background. And we are at an all-time high of information access and an all-time low of wisdom and discernment. And I just want to do better about stewarding those two things.
I think that sounds like a good thing for all of us to do. Thank you again, Dale, for coming on and then for sharing some of your wisdom with all of us. So.
Well, I hope it was wise.
I think it was.
Thanks, bud.
Thank you again, everybody, and have a good day.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.